All right, Neha, the entire waiting room has entered, so the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Lilith. I hope my screen is visible and we're looking at the PPTs. Somebody could confirm.
Yes.
Thank you, Suzanne. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see we have a lot of participants in the room. Few of them are still coming, so let's give it another minute and then we'll get started. Okay, super cool. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, in whatever time zone you all are. Thank you for joining us today for this special Salesforce diagramming session. My name is Neha Bharadwaj, and I am delighted to be your host for the session. As a Salesforce solution architect with a passion for leveraging technology to drive impactful outcomes, I'm thrilled to guide you through this insightful sessions on Salesforce diagramming. And before we dive into the presentation, let me introduce our esteemed speakers. Let's go to the next slide. And first, we have Matthew, the Salesforce Innovation Director at Capgemini. He'll be sharing his expertise on diagramming fundamentals along with a couple of bonus items, as he told us. So be ready for that secret package that he's going to share with us. And then following Matthew's presentation, we will hear from Susanna, a Salesforce architect evangelist with a profound commitment to using technology to improve lives. So Susanna will be discussing the Salesforce diagramming framework and the valuable resources available on architect.salesforce.com. Now, thinking of Salesforce diagram as your trusted compass in the architect's toolbox, it has always helped me at least to navigate the complexities and communicate the ideas that I have in my brain as an architect. And that helps me to build a solution which is easy to communicate to my entire team. So all in all, if I say, I would say as an architect, this is my secret weapon for bringing order and clarity to the chaos in the solutions that we try to build within the team. Without further ado, let's begin with our presentation. And very quickly, a few housekeeping rules before I hand over to Matthew. I request all the participants to please be on mute. Try to ask all the questions on the chat, and once we'll enter into the Q&A section, we'll try to answer your questions. As you say, we're not perfect, neither do we know everything. If you spot a mistake, please do let us know. And if you are interested in hosting or presenting with SAIMA, please reach out to us. Everybody is absolutely welcome. We'll be delighted to have you onboarded. With that, I will hand over to Matthew. Matthew, over to you.
Thanks, Neha. Let me share my screen. Okay, are we all set? It's good.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. So, hello, everybody. Lovely to be with you. Coming to you live from Bristol in the west of England in the UK. So wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day. Thanks to Lilith, my colleague, and also thanks to Neha. It's great to be on another session with Susanna as well. So what I've got for you today is a distillation of some of the content that I have around diagramming. I'll get to the background story with that. There's lots and lots of other things that we could talk about that sort of in the extended topic. If those come up in the Q&A, I've maybe got some backup slides that might be appropriate, but I'm going to focus today on the fundamentals and some ideas around where you can go beyond that. So without further ado, how did we get here? So this all really started, I would say back in about 2016. I had started a job at a strategy consulting company called McKinsey. I always seem to find myself in the wrong job for the thing that I'm trying to do in my professional life. So I set my mind that I would study for this CTA exam, and that would be what I would do. I found myself then at a strategy consulting firm where I was really doing a lot more sort of advisory type activities. I wasn't really building anything on Salesforce hands-on, but there was a need to communicate. So even though I didn't realize it at the time, this was actually very fortuitous. So that communication, as Nihal was saying at the top of the call in the introduction, diagrams really are a secret weapon, and there's several reasons for that we'll touch on as we go through. But I was working on projects around sort of enterprise architecture and Salesforce system and solution architecture, but not building it. But I was needing to communicate those ideas. And the other thing that goes with consulting firms is you often move around quite frequently. So it could be every couple of weeks, could be every couple of months, but I certainly got lots of exposure to different environments and different projects. So this was actually helping me in part of the CTA study that I was involved in, because as part of that, I needed to extract information from a scenario and put it on a page. So that was actually the background for it. At the same time, I also had met a nice guy from San Francisco, long-time trainer in the Salesforce world, called Don Robbins, and he said, "I'm going to be doing these videos for Pluralsight. It's a play-by-play where there's two of us on camera, and what we do is kind of bounce off each other, and what would you like to do the topic on?" I said, "Well, I'll do diagramming, and wouldn't it be cool if we could put the camera above and draw it live?" So that's what we did, and we went ahead and filmed that. So to this day, I get lots of feedback from people that they saw this video and it was really helpful to them. So that always makes me happy, particularly now that it is 6-7 years old, but yeah, indeed it still remains relevant. Following on from that, I moved around a little bit with jobs, but I was still sort of doing the same sort of thing, and I found that for myself that the storytelling aspect was actually one of the parts of the job that came quite naturally to me. So a lot of the diagrams we'll look at today really are around that aspect of storytelling rather than let's say technical design. And, we'll touch on a few examples of where the crossover is. So in 2019, in collaboration with Gemma Blizzard, we were both studying both of us. So we did a number of mock presentations, and we decided that we'd record them. So we recorded those in my kitchen here. I taped up paper on the wall. Luckily, it didn't bleed through. And again, we did some live diagramming, so it was a lot of fun. So both the Pluralsight and the Ladies Be Architects content still available, and there'll be links at the end. And then I think really the diagramming thing, I kind of parked it for a while until about 2022, last year, when I picked it up again for London's Calling, dusted it off, and also did presentations at a couple of other places, and found that it was still very relevant, the basics that we're going to look at today. And also I was able to share some of the other things that I had learned along the way, on the basis that, if I'd found it useful in the beginning to do diagramming, maybe it would be interesting for people to see, the other diagrams, the other diagram types that I was using in my day-to-day. So all of that context I share with you because I know you're all on a journey. So hopefully there's some things there that resonate with you, that maybe you don't always set out to do what you think you're going to do, but good things come of it. So what's the challenge? Well, in real life, or in a scenario, and that real life situation could be an RFP document. It could be notes that you've taken during interviews with with clients. It could be material that's been taken by somebody else and processed, or it could be a test. You could be looking to sharpen your skills. In all these situations, typically you're going to have information that's going to be on paper or in a wiki or in a Google Doc, and you're going to want to do 4 things. And those 4 things are: extract the requirements. You're then going to need to structure the solution and then validate that solution against the requirements. And that may be to go back and review it, or it may be to go back and engage with the people that you heard it from. And that's really where communication comes in, because there's then going to be a wider group of people that are going to need to know, okay, what is it that we're doing and why is it that we're doing that? And the examples that we're going to look at as well, I should mention, work for both, the current situation, which we refer to as the as is, and for, what we like to create in the future to be, sometimes also called the target architecture. So this was the technique that I developed, both for use in my job and also, to speed up my ability to extract, the information that you need to structure a solution as fast as possible in as an efficient way as possible. And I still use this today, even if I'm not in an artificial environment. I still use this if I'm given an RFP. And I found that the 4 things that were most important, and it's 4, by the way, because I would take a piece of A4 paper, I would take a piece of A4 paper like this, and I would draw it into a quadrant, and then I would start noting down as you see here. Now, sometimes that doesn't fit, so I would like write small, or I would actually get more pieces of paper now and have 1 per. But 4 is the magic number for me, and it still holds true. So what we're interested in as we read through the document are, who are the actors? So who's going to be using the system? We need to know that because they're going to need licenses. We're also going to need to detect what are the systems. And sometimes these are listed up front, which is always very useful. Other times you might have to infer, some mention of a finance, is sent to finance. Well, there's probably going to be a system there. So as architects, we're looking to, represent things that we hear and things that we know, from our experience, put them on a page, whether it's written or better as a picture, I find, and then put that in front of somebody and see if they agree or if they disagree. So detecting systems is one of those things that's not always quite as obvious as it might be. And as well, what I look to do, in these situations is to try and make the most of the work that I'm doing. So rather than going through the document multiple times, I'm looking to note down as much pertinent information as I can, but without overloading. So when it comes to the licenses, I might have a first stab at thinking, okay, is that going to be a Salesforce CRM Sales Cloud type license, or is that going to need some kind of special license? Is that a health cloud? Is it some industry solution? Or is it going to be for an external user? Is it going to be some kind of a community license? Let me get into a little bit more of the detail. So the Salesforce objects, and again, this is where you have to use your experience, and this evolves with time. The more systems you work on, the more systems you're involved in creating a solution for, the quicker you'll be to spot that something that's being described in the text in front of you actually is a case object or actually is a lead object. Accounts contacts tend to be fairly straightforward, but there are other objects that don't always immediately come to mind as you read a description of some complicated process, involving somebody outside of the company that wants to make an inquiry about something. That's a lead. And so learning what are the synonyms for lead, again, it helps you to get faster. And using a repeatable structure, I find, has helped me develop those skills, those sharpnesses. And the last thing that I'm sure to capture, because it saves a lot of time of going back through the document, is the system-to-system integrations. So we've gone to the trouble of detecting the systems. Let's now try and understand what are the integration requirements that exist with them. Not necessarily the patterns that might be involved, whether it's a fire or forget, or some kind of, pub sub, but really what's the direction of travel and what are the systems that are involved? Is it one way? Is it bi-directional? So hopefully you shouldn't have anything there in your system to system integrations that, doesn't appear in the systems list above. And that's all, again, another good sense check that you can do. So once we've got that information, then there's 4 pictures really that you can use day to day to tell the story. And, I think within the early stages of a busy project, you can expect to be using most of these daily. Certainly you'll use them several times a week. So the first one is a data model. And I often get the question, what tools do you use to create your diagrams? My first port of call is always pencil and paper, and then second is PowerPoint, just because of, that's my heritage. PowerPoint does not do good entity diagrams, as you can see. So when we get onto Susanna later, I think she's going to show us some much more superior and effective ways to do that. But what we can do, regardless of the tool we use, is to make sure that we add some extra information that's involved on that diagram, and we'll touch on details in a sec. The second one is some kind of a system landscape, and these can take several flavors, but really, what are the systems involved? How do they interact? Typically, if it's a Salesforce project, it's going to be a Salesforce diagram at the center, and then the other systems around. The role hierarchy is another one, and I always struggled with the role hierarchy in the beginning, certainly going back, because it's kind of a mixture of data and structure in itself, and it can get very verbose if you try to represent a very large role hierarchy. So, and examples of that would be, let's say, a state or a county type structure. You're going to end up, if it's the US, with sort of 50 boxes across the page, or if it's counties in the UK, then a couple of hundred. No need to do that. It's okay to kind of indicate the structure and then have, a star to say that it's a repeating pattern. But what we're doing here is representing those actors that we captured on our quadrant within the structure. And as you will remember from your Salesforce studies, it's going to be similar to the organizational structure of the company, but not necessarily identical. And then the last one is some kind of environment and deployment diagram. Now, I'll confess again, it's confession day today, folks. I'll confess again, at the beginning, back in 2016, I'm like, this seems like a nice to have. More and more, this is a must have, and has been for several years. And particularly, since we moved into a world where change sets aren't enough, where there's going to be some kind of source code repository involved, where there's likely to be automated deployments involved. Being able to communicate that to different audiences is really, really critical. So it could be communicating that to other teams that are not Salesforce about what branches you're working on, what environments match up from Salesforce point of view with other systems, whether it's Microsoft, SAP, something like that. It could also be from a security point of view or a compliance point of view, or testing. So there's many, many things. My daughter's just come to ask me to unlock the iPad and give her more time. So I will do that. I know. There you go. It all happens here, home working. Anyway, so the deployment diagram really is quite critical for that. So let's have a quick look in some detail. So as I said, PowerPoint, which this was created on, does not do a great job of an entity relationship diagram. This is where you're far better off using one of the other tools. But being able to represent that structure and then annotate it. So as we go through, within our quadrant, if we've had some within our capture quadrant, if we've had some hint at the volume of data that might be involved, note that down against the object itself, and then we're able then to transfer that onto the diagram here. Also, if we're able to make a first stab at what the sharing defaults might be, also put that onto the entity itself. And then finally, the role of the owner of the record. So who's going to own the record, and then not necessarily what's the name of that user. More effective to say what is the role within the role hierarchy. And it may be that if the ownership changes over time, there might be an internal owner and an external owner, but certainly to indicate whether the record's owned internally or externally if you're working in some kind of community model. And then what you do is, once you put those all on there, you've got one piece of paper that actually allows you to check lots of things and answer lots of questions all at the same time. So we're able to get a feel for, what's the scale of parent-child relationships that we've got. So, with our opportunities, we see we've got 500,000 a year, and we were able to detect from the scenario that there was 100 lines per opportunity typically, so that gives us 50 million a year. So you start to then get a picture of scale of what is your data model. And a quick question, are my notifications coming up on screen share?
Yes, I'm sorry, they are.
Okay. And I don't know how to turn that off, so hopefully nobody else will message me. But yes, we are. We're looking at Data Cloud, and yes, it is a lot of fun. So system landscape. So this can take lots and lots of forms. I've got a few examples for you. Historically, I used to make these very complicated. These days, I make them as simple as possible. Let me close my Teams.
If you put yourself to do not disturb in Teams, that should help as well. Tip of the day.
Thank you, colleague. I appreciate that. There we go. Oh yeah, okay. I don't know how to do that.
It's next to your status, but as you know, Teams is not Salesforce. We have full, you have carte blanche with not knowing that. We completely understand.
Thanks for covering Lilith. By the way, Lilith carries me at Capgemini every day, so it's fine.
Only on Teams related questions.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm just going to close it and cross my fingers. Okay, so whatever the detail that we add, really we expect here to see the systems that we've noted within our capture process, right? So in this example, it's very kind of marketecture. Marketecture is that phrase that we use, which is, it's a little bit salesy. It's really aimed at stakeholders who are not technical. It's really aimed around telling the story. That's why we've got the lovely little jigsaw in there, which was a big hit with the client when I first showed it. But it starts to help people to understand where are the products that they're buying or that they already own. How do they fit in, and how do they fit in with the things that have been in the business for a long time? Up the top, it's always important to include the users, whether you put it up the top or down the side, but always show where are the actors. And again, going back to that capture that we've done at the beginning, where are the actors on the and how do they relate to the systems in the landscape? And again, for you as an architect, this is a great way to sense check what's going on, because if you've got a user trying to access a system, how are they going to log into it? If they, is it single sign-on? Is it going to be, directly with Salesforce credentials? If it's single sign-on, how's that going to happen? You can really start to follow the path that they might take in order to access the system. So that's one example there. Let me show you, this is more sort of the style I used to have in the beginning, which was to sort of show all of the integrations on there, and it can get very busy. So, I typically don't do that now. I just kind of represent the systems are connected. But again, it really depends on the audience that you're presenting to. If you're doing a deep dive with let's say security and compliance people, cybersecurity people, you might want to just sort of cut out part of your diagram, as it were, and add a little bit more detail in there about what are the protocols being used, what are the methods of authentication, how long are the tokens valid for, etc., etc. So you can start to repurpose your assets and pieces of your assets and use them for for conversations you're having with difficult stakeholders. I think that was a bit of a slip there, wasn't it, about cyber, with challenging conversations that you might have where detail is important. Another thing that you can also annotate is ETL. So, if it's a one-time process or, a short-lived process, you can indicate, look, we've got ETL going on here, data load. That's how the data is going to get from the system that we're replacing into some kind of data migration and then over into our target system. And again, this is a bit of a sort of an older style I do. These days, I keep things a lot more simple. and have multiple diagrams that I use for different purposes. But hopefully this gives you then some ideas about what's going on. And as well, you can use it for engagement. So this goes way back to 2016. And this was actually right at the beginning of you know, when I was getting into realizing the sort of significance of these techniques. So this was a flip chart that I had a session with some of the architects at a bank, and it didn't start out like this. It looked a lot cleaner. And then what we used over a period of a couple of weeks, I would keep this rolled up in the team room, and then I would pull it out to every meeting that I went to, and I would get people as they appeared at the meeting to take a look at it and write on it. So I gave them the power to enhance it. So it's not all my writing on here. You can spot my writing, it's the really scrawly stuff. But it meant then that people were buying in, they were engaging, they were invested in the process. So using these, you know, not just only as a tool for yourself, but also as a tool of engagement is really, really powerful. And nothing beats paper or a whiteboard at doing that. So quickly on the role hierarchy, these either tend to be very simple or very complicated, as I've said. So if they're looking very complicated, look for ways to kind of use shorthand to say, well, and there's going to be 50 more states or 49 more states, or, you know, 199 more counties, for example. What we can do is use these things together. So if you remember, we annotated our data model to say, well, what are the data volumes that are involved? And if we also then look at what's the ownership and sharing requirements, we can start to say, well, is there going to be a question? Is there going to be an issue here around performance and scalability? And that would come in the form of sharing rules, which you can also represent on your role hierarchy diagram. So if you're creating a sharing rule, for example, between the sales agent and the front office team, you can put an arrow between there and label that up with the specifics of the sharing rule. But it's a good way to detect, okay, well, what's the volume of sharing records that we would expect to have out of that relationship that we're going to set up. So bringing different sets of information together from separate diagrams into focus at one time is a really, really useful tool. And the last one I said was the environment and deployment diagram. So this is one from Melissa Shepherd, used with permission. And this is the nicest, cleanest diagram that I've seen of this. The ones that I used to use of this were very clunky. So, you know, this is able to represent not only the different environments, but also the different sandboxes, what type of tests take place, how code is moved around from particular branches, how that moves from a branch into an environment, etc., etc. So this is a very useful single page, and it's worth you know, keeping an up-to-date copy of this handy on your laptop, or, you know, in a folio, however you keep your information, so that you can pull it out. You never know when you might need to be describing to somebody why something will or will not work. So that's the basics. We've got as well sort of the second part of my journey through diagrams, I think, which looks at sequences, capability diagrams, how we represent time, and lots more. I'll take a couple of minutes just to give you a taste of these before I hand over to Susanna, and then happy to pick up in the Q&A after that. So sequences is a good one. So this, if you're looking for examples of sequencing, sequence diagrams, typically you're going to find it with login flows, whether that's OAuth or SAML. My go-to resource for this is Lawrence Newcomb at cloudsundial.com. So he's got all of the examples here. And back in the day, you know, the information on the Salesforce websites was not entirely accurate. The information he's got is accurate. And with the sequence diagram, for those of you not familiar, you have your different systems across the top. So the different endpoints that are going to be communicated with, and then going top to bottom, you have the sequence of those steps. So very, very useful for HTTP requests, also very useful for other types of integration, you know, system to system integration. Capabilities. So I spend a lot of my time with capabilities architecture. So I find that when you're trying to build an understanding and build engagement with stakeholders, talking about capabilities really is the sweet spot in terms of detail. It's not as detailed as process level, because the process may change as we change the software, because softwares work in different ways. They're able to do different things. But it's not so general that you're talking at system and vendor level. Okay, when you're talking at system and vendor level, somebody says, oh, we're going to replace SAP with Salesforce. That's a big change. That change may happen over a couple of years. So having capabilities, you're actually then able to say, we're going to transfer the capabilities concerned with case management from SAP into Salesforce in this phase. Then we're going to transfer capabilities X, Y, and Z. And then finally, we're going to transfer over the capability of the golden customer record from SAP to Salesforce. So capabilities are a really, really good way of expressing that. And you don't need to make it up. So this is an invaluable resource for me when I first saw this a few years ago. So this was produced by some enterprise architects within Salesforce. I don't know if it's official Salesforce, but it's certainly it works for me. It's got Salesforce logo on it. You see here by cloud, they talk about the different capabilities. And then if you do a zoom in on these cards, I think I've got that picture. No, I don't have that picture. If you do a zoom in on these cards, and the link is at the end, it actually also talks about features and KPIs and stuff like that. Extremely useful resource. And it just means that you have a starting reference of what the capabilities are relating to sales, for example, rather than making it up every time. You can say, right, sales, account management, contact management, compensation management. Okay, which of these are going to be required in order to create our solution? So you can use that then as the basis of your solution architecture. You can also use it to, represent, how different systems will work together. So you can select the subset that, of capabilities that are going to be needed to solve a customer's particular problem. You can group them in other ways. You can, use diagrams in order to call out the significance, let's say, of integration, which is a very big brick in this wall. So this is very much storytelling type techniques. You couldn't use this to go and give it to a developer and say, build me this, but you're certainly using it to create alignment with your stakeholders. And that extends, to whatever level of detail you want. So you can kind of start to draw sort of a hybrid system landscape with the capabilities involved, organized by some kind of grouping. And again, if you use this day in, day out with your stakeholders, they start to become familiar with it. And I was given a great piece of advice long ago by one of my mentors, which is always have a page, as in always have a picture that you can pull out, and your picture is the right picture. So if you don't have a picture, you're not in such a good position to, help guide the conversation in the direction that it needs to go. And credit here to my colleague, Jake Peaty, a very talented architect and a good eye for design as well. So that's capability. I think we've got a couple of sections just to talk about activity. When am I going to get it? That's what everybody wants to know. So plan on a page. Plan on a page isn't something as grand as we still use Microsoft Project. I don't know if we do, but any of those kind of planning tools or agile tools, this is your ability, your sort of ability as an architect to communicate how long you think things should take and where they should be sequenced. So works fine in PowerPoint, works fine in Excel, works fine on a whiteboard. Let's give it a name so that it's much more legitimate. So it's a plan on a page. And also that page is quite useful. You might want to be talking about what's the agile method you might be using, right? It's a squad model, you're going to use SAFe 2, something like that. Again, starting to paint a picture for people about what's this going to be like if they decide to go forward. And then a bit of touchy-feely. Show people you're working together. So when you run workshops, when you have meetings, when you do whiteboards, don't just keep those things for yourself. You can always throw those into a presentation, because it shows how it's almost like when you were told in school in an exam, show you're working, there's marks for your working. This is very much that. So you're showing, how do we get there? We didn't just make this up. we we went through the process. So this is a little fun exercise we did at Christmas in the office, but having this sort of storyboard and say, hey, we came to see you, we did this is how the stuff that I'm going to talk to you about today got created. Really helps people to tune in. Last things, talking about vision, so uncertain things, horizon thinking. So McKinsey created horizon thinking. You can read about that online, but using horizons rather than fixed dates in time, saying, okay, when we reach this level of maturity, then we are in a position to move into the next horizon, is also a great way to help to communicate to people how we're going to get from the start to the end vision that they saw in the keynote at Dreamforce last year, and they want that. So you've got to help guide them through that. And the very, very last thing, and this is sort of something that I'm using more and more as well, which is the idea of what's the operating model? How's this all going to hang together? So as architects, we know that governance is very important, but how does governance fit inside the organization? And how does the project relate to what we do next? Business doesn't stand still. Salesforce is always about innovation. How are we going to continue to innovate? Why are we using a platform rather than coding everything up in Java? We're using a platform because we can iterate and innovate. So let's talk about how we're going to pull all those things together into an operating model to drive the business forward. So innovation, showcase projects, how are we going to make it repeatable? How are we going to have a digital factory? How are we going to make it scalable so that we can roll it out across markets? And then how are we going to take a product-led approach, which I find is becoming more and more popular. Across the kind of middle strata there is what I call the basic hygiene. So have you got governance defined, including a design authority? Are you communicating standards and best practice? Why do you need standards and best practice? Well, so that everybody knows how they should do things, but also to support onboarding and enablement. So if you're working in larger teams, particularly, you're going to have churn. How can you make sure that you're setting those people up for success, making sure that they know how things should be designed and built, and where they can get the information for that? And I believe that as an architect, it's our obligation to flag this up. So this is a nice little repeatable diagram that we can use to say, hey, here's some things that are important. I think I should be done. So that's the link there. You can use that link, and there's a little form there if you want to leave your details for any possible follow-up, but all the links from stuff are in there. And with that, I will go sort out my notifications, and thank you. I hope you found that informative, and if not, at least entertaining.
Awesome. Let's give Matt a hand. Get my little clappy going.
Thanks, Susanna. Turn your notifications off.
My notifications are off. I learned from watching, but thanks so much, Matt, for your presentation. And I think what I'm going to share next ties really nicely into a lot of the things that we talked about. And I put in the chat, I don't know if folks saw that I used that play-by-play back in 2018 to get ready for doing the CTA 601 at the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to present to people. How do I create a diagram? And I watched that, and the four quadrant strategy I definitely used. And the fact of the matter was, back in 2018, there weren't a lot of resources, right, to learn how to diagram for Salesforce. The play-by-play was one of the only resources out there. And luckily for folks now, maybe just coming into the architecture space, we have another resource that's available, and that's Salesforce diagrams. So that's what I'm going to chat a little bit about. Hopefully not too many slides. I want to show you a couple things on our website, and then also in Lucidchart. So we'll dive right in. So Matt covered a lot of this, and I agree with everything that was said. So diagrams are important for communication, right? They serve as a single source of truth during implementation as well. Folks can refer to them and make sure that they're building things the right way for some types of diagrams, and we'll talk about that. And then at the beginning of the process, they can make sure that stakeholders are making the right purchasing decisions, right? That we're buying the right type of technology to support the business capabilities that we want to leverage. So for Salesforce diagrams, what we created, there's really three main things that are a part of Salesforce diagrams. The first is the diagramming framework that we're going to cover a little bit, but I'll direct you to where you can dive in even deeper. This is really just guidance that's going to help you build the right diagram for the right audience. Because as Matt alluded to, you don't just have one diagram that's going to serve everyone for every single purpose. So we have a framework that can make sure you're choosing the right diagram for the right audience and the right purpose. We also have something called the kit of parts, and this is a set of icons and diagram elements that you can use to build consistent diagrams that your stakeholders can expect to become familiar with too. And so they aren't guessing, like, what does this mean on this diagram? What does this mean on another? It's that consistent way to build a diagram that looks like a Salesforce specific artifact. And then also Salesforce diagrams is fueled by partnerships. So we partner with diagramming tools. So we do support Google Slides and PowerPoint, but we're partnering with diagram specific tools like Lucidchart, like Miro, to make sure that you can use our kit of parts and use the best diagramming tools possible while still leveraging our guidance and our templates. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, so the diagramming framework, there are essentially two diagram styles. The first one is marketing, strategy, and sales diagrams. And these are really for those maybe non-technical folks. It's like the business stakeholders who need to know the high-level capabilities. And these types of diagrams show the big picture and sort of the why of why we're even talking about Salesforce or why we're talking about different pieces of technology. And as we saw from some of the examples in Matt's presentation, this style doesn't necessarily show an implementation ready view. You can't necessarily build something off of that great business capability map, but it definitely has its purpose. So within this style, there are 4 different levels. And actually within both of our styles, there's 4 different levels. And we'll just go through these. We're going to breeze through these really quickly, but this is an example of a level 1 marketing, sales, and strategy diagram. So this is a business capability map. And there's a question in the chat about who is a business capability map for. And this is the examples of the type of audience you could assume you would be presenting this diagram to. So executive stakeholders, like up at the top, folks in like maybe the C-suite, your business stakeholders who actually need to use these applications, and then sometimes some technical influencers just to make sure that we're thinking about these things in the right way. Example use cases of this. So business capability map is a classic level 1 diagram. Also marketecture. I know we already talked about that a little bit as well. Also maybe a blueprint for a solution or a value map. And we have examples of all of these on our website, so we can look at those in just a second. Level 2, and this is the same for both styles, we sort of zoom in. So we go from that view of all of the capabilities, maybe into a single capability. Audience is kind of the same, but then we get into some more, there's like architects that are involved, delivery leads that are involved, because this is really where we like start to see some of the platform choices. So you can see like Salesforce in here and MuleSoft in here, whereas we were just talking about the general capabilities in that first level. Level 3, we go in, we zoom in even farther. So we're not just looking at a capability, we're looking at a single process inside a capability. So this example is the order on behalf process flow. So if you're using Commerce Cloud and you want to allow your reps to order something on behalf of a customer, this is the flow that you might use. So we're getting more into the details here. You can see there's directionality in this diagram. It's a little hard to see. There's arrows going from Commerce Cloud to Service Cloud, for example. And classic examples of this are a business process like we're looking at now, or maybe even a user journey, which is really important to think through as you're solutioning, sort of separating the tech from what an actual user needs to step through in the process that they're trying to complete. And then for level 4, we have the double click. So this is the finest grain detail about that process. So instead of just looking at an overall order on behalf of process, we're looking at how you might do that via chat. So not via phone, not via the website, but via chat. So this has, again, a step of that portion of a business process flow. Might also see a data flow or, again, a user journey that's really scoped to a specific process. Okay, so that's the examples of marketing, sales, and strategy. If we go to the documentation and implementation diagrams, these are the ones that we're building for delivery teams and for technical stakeholders that show how a capability should work or how you should actually implement something, how the products work together to deliver on that solution. And what this style can't show so well is that abstracted view of the business capability or the ROI, things like that, because the relationships between things are a little bit different, right? We're being very literal in this style. And this, as I mentioned, the style has the same thing, 4 levels. So in this level 1, we're looking at a system landscape. So this is a classic level 1 diagram. It's showing the actual products that are involved and the directionality between them, like Salesforce is going to MuleSoft, for example. But we can't necessarily see what we're doing inside like MuleSoft, for example. We might need to go a level deeper. So for that, we can look at a piece of the whole here. So this is a subset of a system landscape that shows, for this case, we're showing the retail storefront solution architecture. That's the cut of the overall solution we're looking at. We could also look at an integration flavor of this. So maybe you go from the system landscape like Matt was showing, and then just look at the integration layer. And here we can see the actual products or technologies involved in specific pieces. So instead of just MuleSoft, for example, we're looking at we're using Anypoint, and we're also using Composer. And then, yeah, an example of this is that integration layer, another classic example. Level 3, same deal as marketing, sales, and strategy. We get into a specific process, like in an example of this might be an authentication flow, like we saw in Matt's presentation. This elements of this that are a little bit different again are that time-based interaction. So the directionality of this becomes really important. So what happens between the systems instead of the people in that order on behalf of solution architecture. And then, of course, the final is a little bit jarring because we go out of our example, but the final level in documentation and implementation is often a data model, right? It's like, how do I actually build what we were talking about? What is the relationships between those objects? And this is a nice segue kind of into what's available on our website, because you'll notice that this diagram looks a lot different from the other ones that we were looking at. And the reason is, and I'm going to go out of my presentation now and move into, let's see if you can see this, our website. Okay, so what we're looking at now is architect.salesforce.com. This is where we have all of the Salesforce Architects resources, and we have a whole section for diagrams. So if I go into the Salesforce diagramming framework, just this first one, and here you're going to see even more detail on those styles and the levels that we sort of breezed through just right now, so you can dig in even deeper. There's examples. So we saw in the slides, the pictures of these diagrams. You can also go in here and actually download the images if you want to use the image in a presentation of your own. But you can also open up what we refer to as templates in Google Slides, PowerPoint, or Lucidchart, so that you can use this as a starter for your own, for example, business capability map. And then the other resource I want to call your attention to is this Salesforce data model notation. I think this is incredibly helpful, especially if you're trying to read the new data models that are on this website. There's a lot of information in these diagrams. So we refer to different things as entities. So like there's the Salesforce entity name, or it's the label of the object, for example, the API name. But then we talk about different entities as far as like what's part of core, what's part of Sales Cloud, what's part of Industries Cloud. And you can really get into this concept of a cloud entity and a related entity. I'm not going to get into that, but all of this is available for you to dig into so you can better understand those data models. The thing that I will dig in just a little bit on is the relationships. So I think Matt showed some good examples of like, how do you represent a lookup versus a master detail relationship? We tend to use this, this library of relationships that you can actually use in most diagramming tools out of the box. And I'll show you in just a second how to create these relationships in Lucidchart, for example. But this is an example of sort of a cheat sheet of how to draw the proper cardinality that you're trying to represent when you're drawing your diagrams. And then the last thing that I will show you before we go into Lucid is the template gallery. So this is your one-stop shop for both data models and also some pre-built diagrams. So if you're like me and you've been around for a little while, you'll remember that the data models used to live in the SOAP API documentation, and they were not always accurate. You couldn't tell when they were last updated, and it was just like an image that you couldn't really do much with. The new home for all of the data models, the official data models for Salesforce, is on architect.salesforce.com. And my favorite part, which is super, super simple, is that you can see when it was last updated, and this is the most up-to-date version. So we can see that not much has changed in Sales Cloud for a little while. Our documentation team is directly responsible for updating these on our website. So you can be confident that this is the most up-to-date version that is released by Salesforce. And then what you can do, you can download the image. Again, if you just want to grab it, throw it in a slide. You can download the diagram, which does the same thing essentially, but you can also open it in Lucidchart. So I'm going to do that. And what you're able to do here, and you can do this with a free account. So with a free account, you can view this diagram and, go in, and if you have, oops, someone's trying to get in. If you have a paid account, you can also go in and customize it, which can be pretty cool because you can maybe say, I'm not using, for example, this relationship, and I want to add in maybe a custom relationship, and you can just drag in one of our cards and create your custom object. So this can be useful to just throw together a quick data model that is scoped to whatever cloud or functionality you're working with. But even if you don't have a paid account, you can still, with free Lucidchart, take advantage of that kit of parts that we talked about on the slides just a few minutes ago. So out of the box, Lucidchart comes with some standard shapes. It comes with connectors like we looked at. Let me actually get into the connectors, be helpful. So you can see there's like this 1, 2, so like this would be 1 to many. If I go down here, this crow's feet, for example. So all the stuff is out of the box with Lucidchart. And what is also available for free, if you go down here to more shapes, what you can find is this library, standard libraries of shapes. So you'll see there are like AWS architectures from past years, Azure libraries from past years. If you scroll down to S for Salesforce, you'll see Salesforce architecture diagrams. And this is our library that we actually keep up to date. So you won't see like the past years. But what you can do is either select all of them or just some of them. And what you get is our standard header, some cards that we're going to look at in a little more detail, and our product icons. And we are updating the icons library right now because we've heard that you need more icons, and I definitely agree. But once you add them, they show up here on this left-hand side in your palette, and you're able to start dragging these on and using them. So in almost all of Matt's diagrams, you probably saw a header, right, that talked about what type of diagram it was, and like the objects or the relationships were up here in this key. So you can go ahead and customize this. Really, obviously easy. One of the best practices, again, the diagramming framework has those best practices. We recommend that you indicate what level, what style and level, if I can spell style, X level 2 or whatever, and then the purpose of the diagram, because I think this is incredibly important, especially if you're maybe working with a architecture diagram or a diagram that's meant for the business, and then it gets emailed. We're using electronic diagrams, so people are sharing these and passing them around, and if it ends up in the hands of someone who's maybe trying to implement it and misinterpreted, then it's going to open up confusion, and someone's maybe going to try to build something that doesn't make a ton of sense. So definitely put that description in. We have our cards, so I'll spend just a little bit of time showing you these cards. So very basic is this collapsed card. So this could represent in our data model, for example, an object. It could represent a system if you're talking about a system landscape, or maybe a business capability in a capability map. And you can obviously customize it with your name, but you can also allow nesting. So you can have a card inside a card for maybe this is Salesforce, and maybe this is like Sales Cloud, for example. And then very easily you can get at some of these attributes. So maybe I want to include my Sales Cloud icon, for example. I can go down here and grab it. Maybe I want to be really fancy and include my Salesforce logo as well. But if we're talking about, let's go back to the data model examples that Matt was talking about. You also might want to have an account, for example. And maybe you want to add some attributes because you want to make sure that your diagram is really rich and dense with information. So you could add information around maybe key fields like a primary key or a custom field that you want to highlight. Or you could even use something called the metadata footer, which is where we typically recommend you would put in something like the owner, or maybe if there was large data volumes, you could put this down in that attribute as well. And then, of course, you can always connect your cards using those connectors that we have. I think the last thing that I'll highlight, just because this is sometimes, I don't know, people spend a lot of time doing this. You can, of course, if you are maybe talking about a sequence diagram and you want to talk about the relationships between blocks, what you can do is actually add some comments. So this is maybe not so useful here, but you could say my comments here. And one of the things that we like to recommend that I think just makes a diagram easier to read is to use what's called a pill around your text. So to do that, you essentially just click on this text pill right here, and it adds a little nice enclosure around whatever text you put in. I've seen people try and like go over here and grab a circle. And then the nice thing about doing this is it's going to stay with the text no matter where you draw it. So nice little Lucidchart hack. But again, all of this, everything that we just did in this diagram, you can do for free with a free Lucidchart account. And right now we have Lucidchart as one of our partners. Diagrams are there. Elements.cloud, if any of you are using that, that's another tooling partner that has our templates and our kit of parts. Didn't really touch on templates so much, but if you want to use a template, it is pretty easy to go to the template library. And I think I did this wrong. Yeah, new. Lucidchart has LucidSpark now, which like always makes my click path a little funky. But if you go new Lucidchart and create from template, this is going to allow you to see not just Salesforce templates, but tons of different templates for different things. But if you go to, again, Salesforce, I think it's inside, let's see, let's just search for Salesforce. So why not? You'll see all the Salesforce diagrams, some of them which are not official. Okay, these ones are the official ones, Salesforce architecture diagrams. So for example, if you wanted to do a system landscape, we have a template that you can use as a starting spot, business capability map, lots of different things you can play around with there. This is available in elements.cloud and soon Safe Harbor. The Shapes library is going to be available in Miro, which is a great tool for a lot of that pre-implementation discovery sessions, again, that Matt had with his nice like sticky notes and things. You can do that with Miro pretty well. So let me just make sure I covered everything I wanted to touch on in these slides. Yes, we talked about tool of your choice. So we support PowerPoint, Google Slides, and then these great diagramming tools. And then how to get started. So the how to build Salesforce diagrams is on the website, architect.salesforce.com. And then we also have, and I think I saw Lilith put this in the chat, we have an entire series on diagramming with examples and things to avoid, things to do on our Salesforce Architects YouTube channel. So definitely encourage you to check that out. And I think we're going to transition now into questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Matt and Suzanne, thank you so much for sharing your practical insight into Salesforce diagramming. It was very practical oriented and we could really implement all of this that you've shown today. So once again, thank you so much. And as you said, this is time for questions. Audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to post. In the meantime, there was a question from Tanvir. where can I get the slide deck for this? I know this is going to be on YouTube, but need the PowerPoint slides posted as well. That will be very helpful.
I need the PowerPoint slides. I need them. So, Tanvi, so no problem. But look, the best thing that you can do is to start to create your own library. So first of all, you're going to practice the skills in doing that, and then keep things that you create as you move around. And that's going to give you the tools that you need. So I think what you're asking for is, how can I start to build my toolbox? You absolutely should do that. And, also you have the opportunity to practice, some examples based on what you see. I would really encourage you to do that. And honestly, if I confess, I always like, oh, let me keep that one. Let me keep that one. And then I move jobs. I'm like, oh, what do I need to take with me? You're not supposed to do that, by the way. In reality, I don't actually reuse stuff, right? You kind of reach a point in your career and your development, and you kind of take a fresh tack at it. So you saw everything I had was, look, compared to what Susanna had, was a bit clunky. My next departure is to start to use Lucid, or to start to use Elements, or to start to use actual proper tooling, because outside of the Salesforce world, this is fairly common, where that design language of using tools to create diagrams, and then use those to create data models, to generate documentation, is all pretty standard. And I think that we're moving towards that point within the Salesforce world. Yeah, the tooling has got so much better. So what I'm saying is, you kind of reach that natural sort of threshold where you sort of like, oh, I know I used to do it that way. Let's take a fresh approach.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. And I'd say, Susanna, whatever she presented, most of it is already available on architects.com, and not just about diagrams. This is a great website for architects. There's a lot. And I mean, since when I've moved to this architect role, I've been using this website. This is amazing, and I would highly recommend it to everyone.
I would too. Don't copy my slides. But I will send Nihar and Lilith a copy of my materials. So no problem with sharing those.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. So
there was a couple of other questions. You want me to pick up on those?
Sure.
Okay, so I saw that Tanvi also asked about the relationship between the role and the data model. Yeah, I've got to do a better version of that picture to kind of illustrate the opportunity there. But really the key there is that within your data model, you've got an entity. If you've labeled that entity up with the approximate data volume, is it 10, 10,000, 10 million, you've got a really useful piece of information. If you've also labeled it up with the role of the record owner, you can relate that role to your role hierarchy, and then you can also consider any other sharing requirements that you might have, which would be using maybe a criteria-based sharing rule or an ownership-based sharing rule. And then if you understand how Salesforce implements sharing behind the scenes, it creates more database records in order to affect that sharing. So it will create one record for each record that exists for the user who needs to access it. So you're able then to understand, okay, am I going to be generating lots and lots of share records? That can be, that's a consideration from an architect's point of view, where you then need to think, well, when the ownership of that record changes, the sharing is going to need to be recalculated. So if there's a large volume of sharing records, that could be an issue with system performance. Likewise, if I'm doing batch reallocations of cases or accounts or whatever, all those share records would need to be recreated as well. Again, is that going to take a long time? So it's getting down into the weeds a little bit, but at the stage where you're producing these diagrams, it gives you the ability to detect things that need further investigation around system performance. And I don't know if Lilith or Susanna wanted to say anything about that, because they're way smarter than me. So that was my hand-waving architect description.
No, I would just add, like, I think it's a good, what you were illustrating is you're using these diagrams together to gather information and make decisions quickly. So you would definitely, yeah, see the owner and then say, okay, well, where does this owner's role fit within the role hierarchy? And exactly like Matt said, that has implications based on how we know Salesforce works.
Lovely. George asked the enterprise architecture and Salesforce diagramming style. So yeah, so I work a lot in situations where maybe Salesforce isn't a given. You know, we're kind of in a transformation type environment. There's other architects that are not Salesforce architects. You know, there's other stakeholders that maybe aren't even aware of what Salesforce is. So using a fairly generic look and feel, if you like, around the diagrams is efficient, shall we say, is practical in that point. What I really loved in looking at you know, the presentation from Susanna is, and a little bit like what I was saying, build your library, you know, and also when I said, you know, keep your pages up to date and keep them with you. If you've got really good looking, clean, you know, Salesforce branded and Salesforce style diagrams for your Salesforce project, it just really sends a message of quality. So it's very, very kind of sort of soft skill type thing. So in that instance, you know, in sort of the wider enterprise, yeah, you can be generic, but I think if you know your colors to the Salesforce mast, go all in. If you're using the products, you know, use the diagramming framework, I would say.
Yeah, I like that question. And I think I agree, like, it all depends on the audience and the purpose, right? So if you're presenting to an architectural review board of enterprise architects that don't like Salesforce, right? Maybe you'd be a little more generic. If you're trying to present, yeah, if you're presenting to a stakeholder who's all in on Salesforce and is familiar with all the tools, the logos, everything, definitely use the Salesforce diagramming framework.
Yep. Yeah, and like the same goes for furry animals. Not everybody likes furry animals on the diagram. You know, if you want to put them in the footer, other people love it. So it really is know your audience and how you're going to have them warm to you as you do your presentation. We focus a lot on the technical. More and more, I find in the differentiator in terms of success is actually, you know, relationships and communication. So anything you can do, you've got the knowledge, right? You know about all of the intricacies. But really, it's about selecting how you're going to present to different audiences that really makes the difference for me in terms of succeeding or pancaking very badly. And there was another question really about that last one, I think, that I noted was also from Anish around what's the audience for capability diagrams, and also a question about how do you present to mixed audiences. So let's kind of roll that together. So capability diagrams are perfect for mixed audiences. So as I described when I was going through it, it's for me the sweet spot between what something does and how something works. So how it works is kind of your step-by-step process in more and more detail, right? And you have drill downs through that, but you might not know that yet. You might not want to get into that yet because maybe it's a contentious subject, but we do need to know broadly, you know, what something does. And, you know, saying Sales Cloud does sales is too big. If we say, what are the capabilities of Sales Cloud? Now we're into a good spot. We can say, well, do we need compensation management? You know, well, no, our salespeople are not commissioned. Actually, they just, you know, just compensated with a salary. Okay, we don't need that capability then. And you can go through and size, you know, what are the parts of Salesforce that you're going to need to configure. And take a look at that Prezi with the capability cards. That was really educational for me when I first saw that.
Yeah, and I think the mixed audience piece, again, it's around the purpose of the diagram, and a technical audience also needs to know about the business capabilities sometimes. So it's, your diagram can have multiple audiences as long as you're clear in the purpose of what you're trying to convey. And the diagram I just shared in the chat is an example of what I would kind of consider a mixed diagram. It's the order of execution, which is obviously very technical, but we've made it a little more accessible looking to folks, because it's not just supposed to be technical. It's also supposed to be something that everyone at least understands at a high level. But would love feedback on if Ruth belongs on this, because that's actually something we've spent more time than we probably should have debating. Does this discredit the seriousness of this particular information?
Yeah, and I think as well, something that is really aided by tools is that drill down, right? So Salesforce diagramming framework, from day one adopted that drill down, which is really, really useful for, for when you create artifacts that are going to be long-lived. They really become part of the materials of the project and of the system as it runs overall. So, as much as a Confluence blog or Google Docs or whatever you've got, spreadsheets, you've got now these living assets, and that means that from an audience point of view, you can go into more detail with with people where it's appropriate. So you might not go down to sequence level with your stakeholder audience, but as you speak with the tech lead, you're going to start going down into that to say, well, look, this is how it works, right? So
right. There's another question, Matt and Susanna, if we can take that. So it says, how much does this diagramming model overlaps with other enterprise architecture diagramming frameworks? Salesforce diagramming is trying to be based on C4, but what about those diagrams? This is from George to Matt.
Yeah, I think that might be a question for Matt. And I think you covered a fair amount of it, Matt. But yes, Salesforce diagramming framework is based on C4, which is an enterprise architecture standard. And then we layer on our Salesforce flavor. I don't know if you have any additional comments, Matt.
yeah, I think it does kind of come back to that sort of, well, yeah, both a judgment call and any standards that exist at the place that you're working. So for me, if it's in a pre-sales role, then I tend, because I don't work for Salesforce, to keep it generic and keep it high level and try and get alignment. That's really the whole mission. Once we're now into delivery, then yeah, I think the details become much more important, and that's where using a tool like Lucid or even like Elements, it also builds integrity into what you're producing. I kind of like PowerPoint because it lets you have a little bit of creative license sometimes with things that actually wouldn't work that way in reality, but what you're trying to do is get everybody on the same page. So it does kind of come back to the right tool for the job.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, that totally makes sense. And I don't see there are any more questions, but audience, if you have any question, please feel free to reach out even after the sessions, and we'll be posting this video on YouTube. So please refer that for future if you need to. With that, I really want to thank Suzanne and Matt for presenting and helping us with this very, very important topic for architects. Also, before we close, I'd like to invite all of you, audience here, to consider joining us as speaker and facilitators in the future SAIMA sessions. And we believe in creating a collaborative community where everyone can contribute and learn from each other. Once again, thank you all of you for actively participating actually, and engaging with us. Have a very nice day, each and every.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.